Writing standard DBQ essays. Step 2. Read, annotate, and label documents. This is part 3 of an 8-part series on how to write standard DBQ essays in history. Each video covers a different step in the writing process. You can watch them all consecutively, or come back to review individual steps as needed. Every document I reference will always be available for download in this video description. Reading, annotating, and labeling your documents is the most important and time-consuming step in the DBQ process. This is when you gather your evidence from a close reading of the provided documents. By close reading, I mean that you are carefully considering the source and interpreting meaning. We call this inferential reasoning. When you infer, you're sort of reading between the lines of a text. You consider the facts presented and make an educated guess about what else might be true. One way to more systematically uncover information in a document is to do detailed document analysis. There are many different document analysis models out there, but they all do pretty much the same thing. Two of the more common models are AP Parts and SOAPs. These are acronyms that help you remember the sorts of questions that skilled historians might ask about a document to develop a deep understanding of its meaning. You can download a handout for each of these models that explains them in detail in this video's description, but I'll explain both of them briefly here. As you can see on the summary slide, with AP Parts, you are to consider the author of the document, along with the place and time it was written. The P stands for prior knowledge, that is the second P, meaning what prior knowledge do you have about the document and the context in which it was written? The answer may be nothing, but it's worth considering. The A asks you to consider the audience of the document for whom it was written. This can have an effect on the document's reliability as well. Reason is about why the document was written. You may need to guess from the context clues on some of these. The main idea asks you to consider the overall point of the document, and finally, significance asks you to think about the usefulness of the document in light of the question at hand. SOAPs is a slightly simpler but equally effective method for deeply reading a document. Subject concerns the topic at hand and what's being discussed, basically the main idea, over in AP Parts. Occasion is just like place and time in AP Parts. Audience is also the same in both methods. Purpose is the same as reason. And then speaker is author. As you can see, the only real difference is the presence of prior knowledge and significance in AP Parts. These are things you should be doing no matter what document analysis system you are using. Your teacher may or may not require you to formally complete document analysis like this when you do a DBQ, but it's a good idea to internalize the basic idea and do it anyway as you read the documents. Trained historians think like this automatically when they approach a source, and with some practice, so will you. Let's take a close look at all the documents, and I'll talk you through my method of annotating and analyzing. The documents don't have to be read in any particular order, but it makes sense to start with number 1. The first thing I do is read the information on the source. The amount of information available on the source will vary by DBQ. This document is from the History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire by Edward Gibbon. It was written in 1788. It's not a primary source because it's not from the period of the topic at hand, but it's still pretty old. As I think about this, I read the text of the document. The decline of Rome was the natural and inevitable effect of immoderate greatness. Prosperity ripened the principle of decay. The causes of destruction multiplied with the extent of conquest. And as soon as time or accident had removed the artificial supports, the stupendous fabric yielded to the pressure of its own weight. Okay, so keeping in mind the question I'm trying to answer, I mark up the document with my thoughts. There isn't really a right or wrong way to do this. The point is that you are actively reading the document. You are fully attending to it and not letting your mind wander. As you can see, I made markings trying to understand the argument Gibbon is making. It appears that he is claiming that Rome reached a point where they got lazy, perhaps from too much prosperity. He uses the word decay here. I don't have a ton of text to work with, but I think he's talking about a serious flaw in Rome's culture or society. Before I move on, I'm going to label this document. Again, this isn't an exact science. I'm just going to give the document a label having to do with the question. In this case, I think cultural or social is fitting. With that, I'm ready to move on to the next document. Okay, here's document 2. It's from The Fall of the Roman Empire, The Military Explanation by Arthur Farrell. I don't know who that is, but I can see from the copyright date of 1986 that this is another secondary source. The text reads, "The decay of trade and industry was not a cause of Rome's fall. There was a decline in agriculture and land was withdrawn from cultivation, in some cases on a very large scale, sometimes as a direct result of barbarian invasions. However, the chief cause of the agricultural decline was high taxation on the marginal land, driving it out of cultivation. Jones is surely right in saying that taxation was spurred by the huge military budget and was thus indirectly the result of the barbarian invasion." So here's how I annotated the document. I realize that he is arguing with someone about this, probably another historian. He says that a decline in trade and industry was not a cause. He goes on to make a counter-argument that it was really about a decline in agriculture, probably brought on in part by the barbarian invasions, but mostly because of high taxation. He even names this guy Jones, who may or may not be the guy he's talking about, who thinks that the decline was all about industry and trade. This document is a great example of what I mean when I say that the study of history is a big ongoing debate. We don't need to know all the intricacies of this particular squabble, but you can see the richness of the argument. At the bottom of the document, I noted the chain of events leading to the collapse of Rome, according to Farrell. This document is more complicated, but highly useful in my quest to answer the question at hand. Incidentally, he doesn't discuss culture at all. I can infer that Gibbon's cultural argument in document 1 may be long dead, or it's discussed in a different part of Farrell's book that we can't read right now. So I give it a label: Invasions and Taxes, and then I'm ready to move on. Document 3 is a table. It lists a bunch of Roman emperors, their reigns, and their causes of death. I see from the dates that these are all emperors ruling toward the end of the empire. There isn't really a clear argument being made, but I can infer all kinds of things that can be useful. I'm noticing patterns, as you can see in my annotations. We have a bunch of emperors in a very short period of time. I seem to remember that their reigns were supposed to be for life. Of course, that would explain why so many of them died violent deaths. Their political enemies can't just wait for the next election to take power, so it appears many of them, shall we say, sped up the natural process. I can infer all kinds of things here, but I think it's safe to say that Rome was politically unstable towards the end, and that citizens probably didn't have a ton of confidence in their leaders. So I give the document a label that conveys this, and I'm ready to move on. Document 4 is the traditional text. It's from a guy named Vegetius, and written about 450 CE. We have our first primary source. It's called Concerning Military Matters. So I can anticipate we'll be looking at the Roman army as a possible cause for the fall. Here's how it reads. Before the year 400, foot soldiers wore breastplates and helmets. But when, because of negligence and laziness, parade ground drills were abandoned, the customary armor began to seem heavy, since the soldiers rarely ever wore it. Therefore, they first asked the emperor to set aside the breastplates, and then the helmets. So our soldiers fought the Goths without any protection for chest and head, and were often beaten by archers. Although there were many disasters which led to the loss of great cities, no one tried to restore breastplates and helmets to the infantry. This it happens that troops in battle, exposed to wounds because they have no armor, think about running and not fighting. As you can see from my annotations, I'm definitely picking up on a theme of laziness here, this time specifically in the army. The soldiers refused to wear breastplates, which I assume is a type of armor. This proved to be disastrous when fighting the Goths, probably a group of barbarian invaders. I label this one with cultural laziness and military decline. Document 5 is a short passage from Michael Grant's The Fall of the Roman Empire, written in 1982, another secondary source. There can be little doubt that the weaknesses of the late Roman army were largely due to the eventual failure to enforce regular conscription, draft of soldiers. The exempted categories were numerous. Hosts of senators, bureaucrats, and clergymen were entitled to avoid the draft, and among other grouped who escaped were cooks, bakers, and slaves. Well, here we have another argument about the weakness of the military. It seems that many people weren't doing what they used to do to keep Rome strong. Of particular importance, it seems, is the breakdown of the draft process. I decided to label this one military weakness. Our last document, document 6, is a map. Like with the table, I'm going to have to rely heavily on inferential reasoning here. I see that it's a map of the Roman Empire, and it's titled Invasions of the Roman Empire, 100 to 500 CE. Then in the box at the bottom right, there's a list of invading groups. What I've learned here is that the invasions happened over several centuries, not all at once. My suspicion that the Goths were a barbarian group are confirmed here too. You should realize that sometimes you pick up clues in one document that can help you understand other documents. My annotations are sparse, but remind me of the big ideas in the document. I simply label it Barbarian Invasions, and I'm done with the document analysis. Understand that analyzing documents in this fashion takes a lot of practice, and it probably won't come naturally to you. For this reason, I strongly encourage you to consider using one of the document analysis models I started with, particularly for your first few DBQs. Eventually, you will start approaching every document you encounter with care. Watch part 4 to learn about the bucketing process.